Welcome, everyone. Hi, all. I'm Bailey Dickey, and I lead networks here at GGB. I'm excited to welcome you all to GGB's 6th annual Evolving Enterprise. This year, we're hosting a series of 7 masterclasses on different topics that are top of mind for CEOs and functional leaders. And the series will run every Wednesday from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific through April 13th. So we have 2 left. If you haven't already, you can view upcoming masterclasses and RSVP via the link I'll drop in the chat. As always, we want to thank Silicon Valley Bank for their continued partnership on Evolving Enterprise and for helping make this series happen. I'm excited to turn it over to Glenn Solomon from here at GGB to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Bailey, and welcome everybody. As Bailey mentioned, I'm Glenn Solomon. I've been at GGB longer than I can remember, and hopefully most of you on this call know us, but in brief, we're a global venture capital firm and are very much looking forward to meeting all of you that we don't know and continuing to back great founders. Speaking of great founders and great company leaders, we have 2 of them with us today. Barr Moses is co-founder and CEO of Monte Carlo. Proud to say that GGB is an investor and have been since Series A, and really excited about where Barr is taking Monte Carlo. And we have Dave McJannet, CEO for the last 6 years, Dave, 6 plus?
Yep,
6 plus years at HashiCorp. Another incredible company that's just crossed the Rubicon from being private to being public not that long ago, and that's the topic we'll touch on today. I don't think either of you need much introduction, but maybe I'll ask you to each, maybe mention just a little bit about your background and then a little bit about your companies as well. Barr, let me ask you to start.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Barr. I'm CEO and co-founder of Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo, we're pioneering a category called data observability. So we work with some of the best data teams in the industry, including folks like Auth0, CNN, JetBlue, Affirm, PagerDuty, and many others to actually help them trust their data. So our mission is to help accelerate the world's adoption of data by reducing what we call data downtime, which is periods of time when data is wrong or inaccurate. We've raised over $100 million from GGV, Excel, Redpoint, Iconic, basically the same folks who invested in HashiCorp, Snowflake, and Looker, and Datadog. A little bit about myself. I've been working with data teams for the last decade or so. Actually started my career in the Israeli military. I learned a lot about sort of kind of data precision and team building. From there, worked as a consultant, mostly with sort of Fortune 500 and other companies on helping them become data-driven, and actually learned through that experience that gaining trust in data was a #1 challenge or barrier to actually becoming data-driven, which is what led to starting Monte Carlo. And yeah, excited to chat today.
Sure, I'll go next. Dave, from HashiCorp. I think a lot of folks are familiar with our tools. We have a variety of products all in the realm of infrastructure automation, everything from Terraform, which is for infrastructure provisioning, Vault for identity-based brokering, Console for service-based networking, kind of the list goes on. We actually have 8 products in our portfolio. I like to view it as a bit of a holding company of a product portfolio with it's taken on sort of this old world, new world transition for many markets in the enterprise software world. I think just to put a data point on it, I think our open source projects were downloaded over 200 million times in the last 12 months. So that's a big number. And we have, I think we serve about, call it 160, 170 of the Fortune 500 and, a pretty large percentage of the Global 2000. I've been here for 6 years, as Glenn highlighted. This is actually my first CEO gig. I had run marketing for a couple of companies that ended up in the public markets too. So I sort of seen the growth arc to the startup ecosystem. And actually started my life as an accountant, which is an interesting thread.
And I should say both Monte Carlo and HashiCorp have graduated from pure startup. But what's neat is they're at different points in the journey. I think the final chapters have certainly yet to be written on both companies, but they're both on incredible growth arcs. and are going after really big markets, but are at different stages of the journey. So it'll be great to contrast where each company is and how the role of CEO changes over time. But it is also interesting to note that both of you started, Barr started in the very formative stages as a founder, and Dave, you joined HashiCorp when it was all of 25 or 30 people, I think, right? So,
Yep.
so really, you there from the very early days. So it'll be interesting to hear your perspective on how things change. And for all of you participating today, you are in listen-only mode right now. If you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat. Many of you submitted questions beforehand, and we've done our best to incorporate a lot of them into today's flow already. But happy to, as things come up, happy to have you add them to the chat, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can. Barr, I was going to start with you, because this is a question we get a lot from founders. How in the early days of Monte Carlo did you and your co-founder Lior decide who would do what between you? And then, how as founders did you try to figure out who you should hire first and what roles people would play? How did you figure out what the swim lanes were really in those early days?
Yeah. First, those were fun times. I actually really love those days. There was a lot to figure out. I think there was a lot to figure out because both me and Lior were very passionate about what we're doing and love it. And so also had sort of strong opinions on what we should be doing. I think the good thing specifically about me and Lior, which by the way, we're married for folks who don't know, is we actually have this sort of natural tendency or kind of natural skill set. And it's very complementary. So the things that I'm, very good at and love doing are very different from what Lior does and loves doing. But we also have a lot of respect for each other. So it was actually the first time, we've known each other for a decade, but it's the first time that we've worked together. And there's actually something really inspiring about seeing your co-founder in their element. And you learn about how great they are at what they're doing. And, you get excited about letting them do more of that. So I think a lot in the early days, it was about figuring out decision-making. So who actually owns a decision at the end of the day, and making that very explicit. So for example, which customer do we work with first? Which feature do we build? Where do we spend our time? Actually, the question of who owns that decision is the thing that we need to figure out. And once we had sort of a charter for that, it was very easy to go from there. But I think in the early days, it's what is the decision-making process between the two co-founders? Was sort of where we spend our time. The other thing that became very clear for me in the early days was that there's sort of two things that became clear. One, when you start a company, the reality is there's 99.9% chance of failure. That's just reality. And despite that reality, you still choose to start a company, which is sort of baffling to think about. So you wake up every day thinking about doing something that is sort of supposed to fail by definition, and yet you're still in it. And there's something about that for me, I actually found invigorating. It was actually sort of the origin of one of our values that we call beat the odds, which is basically as a young startup, everything is stacked against you. Everything is hard, and yet you're in it to beat the odds, to do the 0.01% chance that was really, really hard to do. So that is one of the things that we developed early on. The second thing was the time is against you, actually. Time kills all deals, time kills all companies. There's something about an element of time that introduces urgency and focus on what to do. And those are sort of two things that sort of strings that continue with us to our company today, obviously in very different format. Both Lior and I, have great teams and get team members that carry this forward. And without them, it would have been possible. But those are two things that we really sort of hang on for a long time. I do think in sort of the early days, the first 20 or 30 people that we hired, they have each basically single-handedly 10x the company. They took on a function or a part of the business and ran with it. And just overnight, more or less, within a matter of weeks or months, made a tremendous impact on the industry or the business itself. So in the early days, that's what we were looking for, people who can come in and do that overnight. And today we are sort of moving to teams of people who are highly productive and highly impactful. So it's looking for folks who can bring in those people on their teams. But we still look for the same traits. It's just kind of a different sort of a system of systems, if you will.
That's really cool, and great to hear that your first hires were 10xers. That can have such a impact on things, and I'm curious if there was any specific, like, how did you find those people? They don't grow on trees.
Yeah, at the beginning, it's hard. You're like two people and a couple of slides. And the first people, honestly, I was like, why are you joining? It's really weird. And I think there's also, I still do this today, a little bit of like anti-selling. Like I make a point to actually scare people in an interview process. I'm like, look, this isn't easy. If it's easy, we're doing it wrong. If we didn't fail or didn't hear no a lot, we're doing something wrong. And if you're not excited about it, this is not a good fit for you. So I think just being really transparent about that. In the early days, honestly, it's a lot of people who like know us or work with us in the past who took a bet on us, honestly. And I'm so grateful for them. I don't know what they were thinking, but I'm very grateful for them for doing that. And then the other sort of big thing that I think is exciting for people in the early days is sort of the idea of creating a new category, actually. So creating something from scratch. That was really, really exciting for people. So I think it was more actually qualifying out. If you are a masochist and you love doing hard things and you want to create something from scratch, we'd love to have you. But actually, a large majority of people are typically not excited about that.
That's great. Dave, I want to shift gears to you. You've talked about the importance of product marketing being like really critical to get right early on, and that shaped, I think, a lot of your hiring strategies. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that and how it's impacted how you've built the team at HashiCorp?
Yeah, I always think about this, how big these markets are, and someone who's prosecuted this a couple of different times. The market is just so big. So the magic happens when there's the combination of a product being built, coupled with the ability to articulate the value proposition, right? Because it's not like we're selling, beef where markets are saturated. There's only so much that gets sold in the world. My ability to convince you that you will realize ROI by adopting my product is 99.9% of the challenge, because you have plenty of budget to spend on the category that I care about, because this is an amorphous category. All the categories of software are like so nascent. They're in the beginning. So to me, it's the ability to convince somebody to buy something and then to come back a year later and show the ROI they've attained from it is like, it's literally how we build these businesses. So I just think it's the magic that's required early days is great to have sort of product idea. How I marry that with a narrative about why you should care. That is the magic. And so sometimes it comes from the CEO, sometimes it comes from the founder, sometimes it comes from product marketing. But that essential ingredient is sort of table stakes for how these companies get created. I think we've talked about that a fair bit.
That's awesome. Maybe, pulling on that thread a little bit more, and asking you, you have a framework around like leaders and the types of people you want to hire, and what kind, like how that transitions over time. Can you walk through what you've seen at HashiCorp as you've grown the business, and how kind of the key attributes have had to change over time and what you're looking for?
Sure. Yeah. People always ask so like, how do we think about, hey, we're early stage, we have 20 people or 15 people, like what should we be hiring for? And there's just a truth. There's a truism that a company's like an orchestra. You just need different people in different seats. And in fact, in every onboarding I do, I just say, hey, you could be in my seat, I could be in yours. The fact that somebody has to be in each of these seats to make the machine go. So let's just accept that. Finance is no less important than marketing, is no less important than the product teams. They all have to be participating. So point number one is you have to sort of accept that the company's got several systems in it. There's a financial plan, a people plan, a product plan, and a go-to-market plan. Great. So you need those functional areas covered. Then the question becomes, okay, at what order do I add those people? And I think my point being, I feel like the product marketing, market value description is in my mind the first thing you need to hire after getting the initial product stuff out of the way. I think what happens over time is you sort of identify, hey, I need functional leaders for each of these different systems, because ultimately I'm trying to create functional systems across the company. Then what is the profile of the person to fill those things? And like in the very, very early days, you just have to accept that you're going to have to hire leaders for these things. But then you have to sort of actually have a slightly different, in my view, management approach for those people. I think there's a tendency to say, oh, I've hired a head of marketing. Great, I'm going to hire a head of marketing and drop them in. They're going to make this thing really hum, and off they go. And I think I've learned over time that there's almost a maturity model to those functional leaders and how you interact with them. In the early days, outside of me doing all the work, became me using those people as my arms and legs. I mean, quite directive. I think sort of the first stage of management as a management style is very directive. Hey, you're coming in to run marketing. This is how it works. I want you to scale it, but this is how it works. And that's actually an uncomfortable thing for people that maybe haven't run that function to say, like, go and tell a marketing person what to do. I'm not saying you're going to tell them what to do, but you actually have to have an opinion about how this machine works, because that person otherwise will come in and try and put in place a system that they already know, and that system may not be appropriate for you. And so that's the first thing that happens for the first period of onboarding people. And I think what we find in the second phase, it's you hire people that can present a framework to you of how marketing works or how product development works. And so then it's much more about managing through interrogation, sort of like I hire a relatively senior person, but I want you to describe to me simply how this works. I'm not an expert in this area, but you should be able to describe to me in simple words how this works and have me go, okay, let me test it. Sure, that makes perfect sense to me. I think that's where most people end up when they hire executives. And the mistake people make is to try and say, come in and do your thing, but you need to actually have that interrogative, give me the short version. At our scale now, like it or not, we're over 2,000 people, and they're, from the mature functional leaders, it's about planning and accountability. It's like, show me the plans, execute them. If not, there are consequences for that. I think that's unfortunately the style that you have to get to. So those three styles represent how they sort of evolve over the course of time. And I think we also have to just accept that sometimes when you bring in a new executive, you actually have to go back to an earlier style to allow them to onboard, rather, in a sort of interrogative way, rather than just sort of dropping them in and saying, perform. So that's sort of the rough three categories.
So you might be at different stages with different functional leaders.
Totally. At the same time. And it's flat out unfair. And I actually think I think we cycle out execs a lot in our industry when we don't need to, because it's a mistake on the part of the CEO of expectation management. I ascribe to the Mark Twain quote of, I sat down to write a short letter, but I couldn't, so I wrote a long one. And I get that a lot from folks. And my view on everybody that reports to me is, I want you to tell me what's the framework for your function. Like that's where I start. I don't understand HR. I don't understand all the pieces, but you should be able to describe it simply to me. And I think that's where we should all start, not just expect people to come in and run a function.
Great. Barr, I want to shift it over to you. I saw you nodding your head while Dave was speaking. As you've grown the company, you've had to hire more people, more leaders, and you've said that there are more people available. There are more people on the market today that have startup journey experience than maybe in the past. And I'm curious, like what qualities and experiences do you look for in senior folks when you're looking to add them at Monte Carlo? And you think this experience, does experience allow people to move more quickly, or do you find sometimes you need to, have people unlearn things they've learned in the past to be successful at Monte Carlo?
Yeah, definitely. So the stage that we're at is, we have sort of largely our management team built out, and I sort of think about this as I'm going to talk about this like kind of like a basketball team or a soccer team, where like we have really strong players in each function, but now it's about working them, making sure that they work really well together as sort of a winning team, which is actually different than having a winning person in each function. And sort of what is my role in bringing that together? It's kind of where we're spending time. In terms of kind of hiring specific folks for this role, I do think that we are, 5 to 10 years ago, or even like a decade ago, we're just writing the playbook for SaaS, right? So, Salesforce created a playbook and Marketo created a playbook, right? And like you had to figure that out from scratch. Like, how do you actually create that? How do you create a go-to-market motion? And today, and especially for us in particular in the data industry, there are companies, that have sort of forged the way for us in a sense, like Segment and Snowflake and Databricks, of actually like folks who have experience kind of creating those companies and have seen that scale. And so hiring folks who have seen that or have experience with that has been very helpful for us. Oftentimes folks who want to come in and, so do it like bigger, better, faster if they can. That's what gets them excited. There's definitely a lot of things to unlearn, for sure. I like to think about this as like we each come in with sort of the scratches on our back, and thinking about like what are sort of the scars on our back, but sort of what are those scars that we have. So for example, someone may have come from a company where there was a particular issue with a specific function, or they have like a pet peeve about something that worked really well, or maybe they're really used to a particular sort of playbook for customer success, or for onboarding, or for category creation, or whatever it is. And actually gaining awareness of that as you come in and saying, hey, actually, in fact, that might not work here. And it's okay that, you want to do that, but maybe that's just not appropriate for our stage, or for this particular category, or for this particular time and market. And just both getting an awareness of sort of those scars on your back, and also talking a lot about that. I do find that sort of, the common things across folks that I look for is people who move faster than me. So people that instead of me asking, why can't we get this done today, they ask that. So they're moving the company forward. Oftentimes I have to say, hey, we're doing too much. Maybe we have to do less, actually, that will allow us to move faster. But finding those people has been very helpful for me in particular. And then the other thing, I was sort of nodding to Dave's comments earlier, sort of like that. I really like the framework of sort of kind of directive and interrogative and accountability. I do see sort of that different variability in the function as a company grows as well. So you sort of start out, potentially with like marketing, maybe build out a little bit more, sales function, engineering, of course, and product. And then over time, you build out customer success, solution architecture, more sort of like teams within teams, if you will. So when's the right time to actually build that? And you have to match that with opportunistically finding the right people. So I actually find that I spend the most time on finding where people's energy is at and what the company needs. So if someone's really excited about like the 0 to 1 stage, but our marketing function is not in a 0 to 1 stage, and it's not a good fit, for example. But if someone is really excited about taking a playbook that's already working at scaling, then maybe that is an appropriate stage. So actually finding that match is like figuring out exactly where is this person's strengths and what are the needs of the company, and matching those.
And Barr, maybe a question about just the recruitment market right now. It's a very tight market, right? But your company seems to have a great brand, like a great recruiting brand. Has that been intentional? How have you guys, tried to make sure you rise above the noise and have success closing the people you want to have join?
Yeah, I think in that sense, it's a little bit like you're sort of playing sort of poker, or kind of a game of cards, and like you have to play whatever hand you have, right? Whatever cards you have to play that the best as you can. So you're not going to be great at everything as a company. We're not going to be amazing at everything. That's just not going to happen. But we have to figure out what we're really good at and use that, or double down on that, or sort of play the best that we can, play to win with that. And finding people who that resonates with. So for example, in Monte Carlo, we spent a lot of time creating the category, actually, and evangelizing the category of data observability. So we actually create a lot of content. Like I spent a lot of time on that personally, and it's a very important part of our company. We found that actually the large majority of people who join Monte Carlo is because they've read some of our content and got excited about that. So actually the efforts that we put towards category creation have also helped us in recruiting in particular. So that's, some of the things that we've learned in terms of sourcing people. In terms of actually closing people, we've done an employee NPS not too long ago. We got really high remarks. We just refreshed it, and I think like more than 50% give like a perfect score of 10, actually, in terms of like excitement and working at Monte Carlo. And the number one reason is working with other people at the company. So folks are really excited about collaborating with other people. And so we've incorporated that in our recruiting process. So basically, I think a strong recruiting and closing process, if it's fun for the employee, it also means that for the candidate, it means that the candidate will enjoy working at the company. And so we make an effort to like get that person getting to know the people that they'll be working with, and being really transparent about what our culture is like. And if they enjoy it, they enjoy the process, they'll likely do well. And if they don't, then it's sort of a good, I think good interview process will both like sell and qualify at the same time.
That's super helpful. Dave, on your end, as your team's gotten much bigger, you've managed to keep a lot of folks from the early days of the company. I imagine they've grown and are doing different things, but they're, how have you, maybe two questions for you. One, how have you been able to keep people engaged and find the right roles for them who were, maybe earlier in the company's life? And then two, as you've needed to bring in execs in particular, like, how have you done that? Have you used search firms? Have you, relied on the networks of the people in the company? Just curious, like, for any best practices there.
So on the first question, there's a good number of people that have been here for quite a while. In fact, it's kind of fun. A bunch of our field team, this is our third company together. So there's definitely some patterns to that. I think the people that really enjoy these kinds of value creation journeys are like, they do have some properties. They are, some of them have worked in big companies before and seen what that looks like. So they kind of know what it looks like at the end, but like the messy middle part. But they generally are deeply intellectually curious, is the truth. Like it's the curiosity that, that people find these domains intriguing. Those are the people that tend to stick it out and be like, yeah, this is just cool. It's just cool what we do. That is the property that I think defines a lot of these early folks. They found it really interesting. And then the ones
by the way, that goes back to your product marketing, emphasis as well, right? Like, if you can make it interesting, both your companies have done that. It definitely has, benefit well beyond just the customer part of your business.
Talk about importance of storytelling. It's funny. It's actually kind of funny. As an aside, I noticed that somebody did a comparably rating on us recently. Somebody just shared with me yesterday, and I noticed in a lot of the review comments, the employees all talk about clarity of mission. Like that's what resonates with them. They see us talking about the simplicity of our mission. It's very, very clear. And they go, yeah, that's cool to me. Like, it's kind of intellectually interesting. And so I think it has huge benefits internally. But I would say number one, some of them, these folks have sort of seen bigger companies and so know what it looks like, but they're really curious is their thing. And then number two, and number three, the thing that makes people scale is their ability to distill simplicity out of complexity. Like, it is as simple as that. Because those people tend to be framework thinkers. If you're a framework thinker, you can internalize, the phase of the company we're in today is just a different phase, different scale that we were before. I actually need to recast the system of product marketing, whatever it is, for this new phase. And so that system thinking skill is the one that gets exercised. So the people that have been here for a while, they're just very good systems thinkers. And we happen to have a good number of those people from the early days. And we found roles for them over the course of time that maybe that function got too big, but we found another function where we needed to exercise that skill. A good example, like Kevin Fishner, who's my chief of staff, he ran products and he ran marketing initially. He's an incredible systems thinker. We see the guy that's going to run a 150-person marketing org, maybe not because he's earlier in career, but that system thinking skill is incredibly prized. In terms of how we bring in execs, I think there's a reality. And again, my view is if people are systems thinkers, they will scale. My question is, can I coach them? I happen to have done this a couple of times, so have a point of view of most of the functions. Can I coach them into that position faster than the need of that position? The answer isn't always yes. So the challenge is when you identify that this function needs sort of a new leader. Honestly, the challenge is doing it early enough so that you can retain the person that was running that function and find a different role for them. If you elevate them too early, it actually becomes inevitable that you have to exit them from the company. If you capture them on the way up and say, you know what, this is not going to work for you long term. We need a different person for this phase. Let me find another spot for you. You can keep that person in the company. If you wait a year, that person's now VP of products, whatever it is, they're going to leave when you bring in the other senior person to replace them. And that is a serious issue that every company runs into if you don't do it soon enough. So I would highly caution people when you see that, act on it early, because you can find a role for those people. If you wait too long, it doesn't work. So yeah, we use search firms. We're big users of search firms. I think they play an important role. And I think we use them successfully. We use them mostly because I don't have the time to run a search Not that I couldn't run one, I just need someone to program manage it by and large. So yes, we use search firms, but then we make sure that the person running the function previously, more often than not has another role.
Very cool. I want to shift gears a little bit to culture and leadership and how that impacts culture. And maybe Barr, I'll start with you. You mentioned that early on you built core values for Monte Carlo. That was something you took very seriously. Curious, like how, tell us about that intentionality of building like the core values and ultimately how that became your culture. And maybe now as you've been building the company for a few years, have things stayed the same or have you had to evolve your core values and ultimately your culture? Curious, if you can talk about that a little bit, because it's clearly setting Monte Carlo apart.
Yeah, I think put together our values. We were like 4 or 5 people, like quite early on. And in general, in starting the company, I think, I was like, honestly, I love the job that I had before. And so I was like, if I'm leaving my cushy job and getting other people to leave their cushy job, this better be something that we're really excited about that. And I, in my experiences, love working in companies where there was strong culture and values that were not just posters and whatnot. And so very early on, we wrote it. Most of the team that at the time was largely engineering. And we sat together to write this. And actually, my background is in customer success. So I worked at Gainsight previously. And so, being in customer success, I was like, oh, I can't have customer success in the values. It's going to look really cliche. No one's going to take me seriously. I'm just going to casually drop that and not have that and hope no one notices. And the team gave me so much shit for it. They were like, are you kidding me? The only thing that matters is customer impact. There's nothing that's more important. How did you not have that in your values? In my proposal. I got totally trumped there, and I agree with them. And so actually, our very first value is customer impact. It's sort of our true north in every way. And I think it's important to not just have the values, but find ways that exemplify that. So, for example, our engineering and product organization is actually gold after revenue as a proxy for customer impact and customer happiness. There isn't some other goal that they're working on. There's not some other agenda. Everyone is actually focused on the same things. And, I always say there's only 2 things that matter at the company. They're only for now and forever, there are only 2 goals, which is get as many customers as possible, make customers as happy as possible. That's it. And if you're not working towards one of those 2 goals, you're working on the wrong things. I really believe in making that very simple. Everyone who joins a company can know whether they're working on something that matters or not. And if not, it's not a good use of their time. The other value that I mentioned earlier is beat the odds. We sort of get pleasure by trying to do things that are impossible. We get excited about setting really ambitious goals, and winning as a team is an important part. The other sort of big value or kind of controversial value that we have is called measuring minutes, which speaks to sort of the time and urgency that I spoke about at the beginning. So earlier in my career, someone told me, for everything that you're trying to do, you can do the 3-week version, the 3-day version, or the 30-minute version. And let's just align on what version you're doing. And so at Monte Carlo, we sort of decided early on, we always do the 30-minute version. Now, it doesn't mean that we do anything illegal or that we, do bad quality work, but rather it means that we distill the work to the 1 or 2 things that really matter, and we let all the other fires burn. And that takes extreme sort of thinking or dedication to what's the only 1 or 2 things that matter, and we only focus on them. And that, translates to kind of what we call those 2 company objectives that are now and forever. And every function has only 1 or 2 things that we call sort of, the things that they work on. They're most important. And so it's really about speed and focus. And those 2 terms are not part of our values, but it's something that I think a lot about. So actually my weekly staff meeting is called Speed and Focus, to remind everyone what's important, which is speed and focus. And so, I'm truly obsessed about that. And I would like to retain that as we grow as a company. To be honest, I don't know how we're going to do it, but I'm determined to make it happen. And I wake up every day thinking about how do we move faster. And my team members know it and they are obsessed about it the same. And we've actually sometimes I'll do something and my team is like, wait, why can't you do that today? Why aren't you doing that next week? And I'm like, yeah, you're so right. I recently ran like a survey with feedback about myself. I do this twice a year, open survey to the company, anonymous. And then I actually share the results transparently, 100%. I don't mask anything, just share it back with the team. And actually someone gave me feedback to move faster. And I was like, who's the brilliant person who said that? I'm so happy. So actually it's become sort of this self-reinforcing thing where like people are holding each other to those things. And that's really sort of what we're hoping to achieve with the values. As we've scaled, obviously we've had to do things differently. So actually the first hires that we made on the people function were 2 culture managers. And that's what they're dedicated to. They're dedicated just to our culture, which I don't know if it's sort of a common rule, but I think it should be. And what they do is spend a lot of time thinking about our values and how to make them sort of permeate across the company, and how to take each of the values and have something that's like actually ingrained in the company. So another sort of the fourth value is called ship and iterate, which means just, in order to move fast, we ship things very quickly, even when they're not perfect. In fact, we expect them to be not perfect. And so one of our values, or one of the traditions related to that value, is what we call week 1 ship. So this actually started in engineering, where every person who joined the company in the very first week had to ship code to production. Like it has to be something that a customer sees. It can be small. It doesn't have to be an entire feature, obviously, but it has to ship to production. And we actually extended that to the entire company. So everyone who joins Monte Carlo ships to production in the first week. It could be that you get on a customer call, you release a blog, whatever it is, has to be external facing. From day one, you're an active participant. It also, sends one of the things that I believe very much, which is execution is more important than strategy. And so you join the company and you start executing. There's no 30-day, 90-day learning period. You are an active participant member and you're impacting our customers from day one. There's nothing that matters more important. And then the last value is have fun, which ties to sort of, being really proud of the journey. We want to look back at I think the journey is what matters. And, we can all be doing other things. And so if we're here, let's be intentional about the kind of company that we build and being really proud of the work that we're doing and how we treat each other, and what kind of company we build. So that's sort of how we've thought about it from day one. And it's obviously like evolved and, build more and more traditions, but I personally spend a lot of time thinking about this.
Do you, as you've gotten bigger, do you find it sounds like there's a lot of self-reinforcing mechanisms in your culture, but I was going to ask about how do you maintain it as you get bigger? Anything you're doing there to make sure that, you don't lose some of the magic, and as you get larger?
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I think it's, if left alone, it would sort of dissipate. We definitely do things. One is, I think it's very important that we exemplify this ourselves, leadership in particular, but sort of everyone at the company. And so I try to be the fastest in the room. I try. And when I call that as not, I love it. I try to beat the odds in everything that I do. And so actually trying to exemplify that myself is something that I try to do a lot. The other thing that we do is every functional leader, and this is actually something that the team started without me, every functional leader, as new people on board, they actually walk them through an interpretation of what the values means for them. So the value of measuring minutes is very different in engineering versus sales versus marketing, but there is an interpretation to that. And I find that smart people, when they join a company, they're typically not like, oh, I'm just going to drink the Kool-Aid of the values and live it. They typically have to process through it or have to understand what it means for them in their lives. So a lot of our functional leaders actually write it up. This is how I read each of these values, and then share that with each other and have that discussion. So there's something about an internal processing that people need to go through that I find has been really helpful and reinforced. We actually create this sort of collection of stories for how we've exemplified each of the values. So a great story for how we beat the odds, or how we measured in minutes, we closed a deal in, in a 7-figure deal in 3.5 days. Or, how do we write a blog post in half an hour versus like 2 weeks, for example. So just small stories, but things that sort of remind people of what it means to do those things and to live them.
It's really cool that, I mean, I always tell companies, take photos of every kind of phase of the journey, you know, your office and who was there at the time. And you know, it's a way to build kind of the history and the mythology, because, and I think collecting stories of, you know, culturally aligned accomplishments is really great. Another great way to do that. Dave, you know, you've scaled well past where Monte Carlo is now, and, you know, have had the Tao of HashiCorp, and, you know, have really been very intentional about, you know, what you've chosen to make important and emphasized internally. Curious, like, what it's been like as you've gotten bigger, and also you're a virtual company, or almost completely virtual, and certainly that has only been exacerbated by the pandemic, how that's impacted your management of culture and how you've shown up as a leader.
I'm kind of smiling listening to Barr speak, because I think she just exposed exactly how it works, which is the magic of startup companies is there is, for, you know, for better or for worse, there's founder mythology to it. And I think what she just described is the things she cares about are very obviously directly things she cares about. And I think that's the exercise that every founder has to go through, because it really matters when you get big. Think about our core values. It's not fake, it's not pretend, it just happens to be a distillation of how Armon and Mitchell think about the world. No, so the things in the Tao of HashiCorp are them, right? It's not, hey, I'm imagining a company and, you know, wouldn't it be cool if these were the principles? It's no, like, this is how we think about things. You know, there's an innate humility, there's an innate pragmatism, there's like a view that, you know, building beautiful things matters. Like, that is just them. And I think getting that right at the beginning really matters. And this exercise of like distillation of sort of almost like self-assessment that we all need to do when we start these companies is a really important exercise, because we can't fake it. When I communicate, or when Armon communicates, it's grounded in those same values, whether we like it or not. I think that's how it scales ultimately. Yeah, there are techniques, like when I do an onboarding every couple of weeks, you know, I use the phrase, hey, a company is nothing more than a group of people aligned around a common idea. And we're aligned around two ideas. One is our mission, and the second is the principles that we're going to exhibit in the retirement of that mission. So we reinforce it over and over again. But ultimately, every interaction with Armon or Mitchell or me, I think what you take away take away from that interaction is sort of alignment to those core things that we project. I think that's how it works in the end. Like, there's no faking it. There's no techniques outside of that, which kind of gets me back to like the importance of doing it at the beginning. And we sort of don't think about it a lot, you know, along the way, maybe the way we should. But I think putting the time and energy into that self-reflective moment is what sets you up for running this. Whether we're 2,000 people running remotely, or whether we're 200 people in a room, like, people will feel a certain way when they interact with me speaking to them. And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. Any, like, as you know, you guys get the company together, or in the past have gotten the company together every year, once a year. And I know that's been an important way to kind of keep everybody rowing in the same direction, and been a lot of benefits to it. I know that gets more difficult as you get bigger, and also as, you know,
COVID gets in the way.
Unexpected COVID waves come. So how have you been able to compensate for that?
Yeah, we do that. We have rhythms and rituals to it. For example, in our keynotes that we do at these events, we give out awards for people that are exhibiting the cultures that we care about, and it's very visibly projected forward. But honestly, like, I think it is just, I think the first, 20 or 30 people, or maybe 40 people you hire in your company will be aligned to that. Like, it's a pretty personal thing of value alignment. And I think that group is the one that sort of propagates it forward. So it actually isn't that difficult, truthfully, if you are clear in that sort of inception moment about what your values are. As you get to thousands of people, that community keeps it in check, is how I would say it. So we don't really have to do that much artificial.
Amazing. So I want to shift gears yet again. It's obvious hearing from both of you that you are each incredible, very thoughtful and incredible practitioners of the CEO job. And I think a lot of people who are starting companies are unsure of their own ability to grow into CEO role. And there's a lot of mystique around it and what it really means. And so my hope is we can spend a couple minutes trying to demystify some of what it, so how to be a great CEO in 10 minutes or less. So, Barr, maybe you could start, like, very curious just how you spend your time, break down like a typical day or a typical week for us, and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I actually write a job description for myself almost every quarter. I actually find it, I tell my team, like, we're lucky to write new job descriptions every quarter, every month. It means that companies change so much that we need to do job descriptions. I also think of myself as on a quarterly contract. I actually think of the company as on a quarterly contract. And we talk a lot about this with the team. Like, imagine the company dies in a quarter at the end of the quarter. What's the one or two things that we're doing now to save the company? That's the stuff that we should be doing. So that's where I spend my time. Of course, there's like long-term vision, and we're here for the long game. We want to build a great iconic company that is sort of long-lasting in the industry. We think the opportunity is there. We're very bullish long-term, but I think the execution is here and now. And if we don't execute this quarter, I don't know what's next quarter going to look like. And so I'm very focused on solving the problem ahead of us versus worrying about future hypothetical problems. That's controversial often, but that's what I try to hold myself. And so I actually write job descriptions for myself every quarter. I get feedback from my team on it. I have mentors and coaches that I share with and sort of discuss what to do. In terms of where I spend my time today, actually, by the way, I solicit feedback from my team also on like where they think I should spend time, and I inform that. There's some areas where I can be helpful and some areas where I'm really not helpful, and I should just stop doing that. Sales being one of them as an example. I think in the early days it was fine, and then after a while I was like, yeah, I should just stop doing this and let people who actually know what they're doing do. So it ends up being sort of category creation. I spend a lot of time, so quite a few sort of speaking opportunity, podcasts, blogs, writing content. For us, category creation is existential. Like, it's one of those things where I'm like, this needs to happen now, every quarter, and this quarter right now. So because of that, I spend a lot of time on that. The other thing I spend a lot of time was with our customers and prospects. So with the people who are actually using our product, we're actually facing these challenges. So I spend a significant amount of time intentionally with different customers from different sizes and stages of maturity, as well as prospects, mostly understanding like what's top of mind for them, what's a priority for them, and also making connections. Most of our customers at the end of the day want to get connected with other customers. So helping facilitate that. The third area is recruiting. So a lot of hiring, a lot of like team building. So my team building is a big function. And then the fourth area is team management. So how do I support my team members in making them, in setting them up for success? What do they need from me right now? Sometimes it's, to get out of the way. Most of the time it's to just get out of their way and let them do their thing and let them run. But sometimes, for example, there was, when we were very, very small, obviously I was involved with every hire. And then at a certain point, of course, that doesn't scale. And so we need to put together sort of guidelines for like, what's our financial plan for hiring? What are comp bands? What are budgets for each function? And then every functional leader can run with their plan, obviously. And so I think of that as a model for everything else that we do. At the beginning, I can do it, but then I work with my team on some sort of strategy or framework for that, and then they can run within that. So building for speed and autonomy with that model has worked pretty well for us so far.
You mentioned your weekly staff meeting you call speed and focus, not slow and confused. You also mentioned earlier, I don't know if you're still doing this, but many CEOs are doing one-on-ones with their directs and sometimes skip levels all the time. And it sounds like, are you still doing those, or have you moved away from that?
I've actually, this is something drastic that I did recently, which is actually blow up my calendar. I think this also has to do with the pandemic, but I was like, I'm on like 10 hours of Zoom calls and I'm not loving my life. And so I basically removed all meetings and sort of started from scratch. And I do find that sort of being there for my team when they need it versus being there on some artificial schedule has been more effective. It might change on the line, but for right now, it's way easier for me to get on a quick call with them and actually work through something for 20 minutes or half an hour versus like
who initiates those ad hocs? Is it your team or you or either?
It's typically both. So we've like developed kind of strong enough. Honestly, I think working through the pandemic online has forced us to work really well async on things. And so if we can figure out things async, we do. But if we need to get on a quick call, it could be either of us. We're like, look, there's actually an accumulation of 2 to 3 things that we've been chatting on Slack, and this isn't getting solved. Let's actually get on a call and work through it. And I've found that to be more effective. The other thing that I try to do is make, sort of thinking through how do I get the team to work together and for us to kind of continue to be sort of a strong team is actually driving a lot of transparency in how I manage and what I expect. So one of the things that Dave mentioned before is like, how do people up level themselves? And as companies scale, continue to scale themselves. And the reality is each and every one of us has to continue scaling themselves. And so actually what we did in our most recent speed and focus, this was literally Wednesday last week, each of us came prepared to the meeting with one thing that we are personally working on to up level ourselves. So everyone was just like really vulnerable and like, here's the specific skill set that I'm working on, and others might have it and can help me with it. But this is what I need to up level now that the company is not the same as we were last year or last 6 months or something like that. And so it was actually nice to see folks helping each other and offering to support in those areas. That's definitely something that, sort of extending beyond not just my ability to help folks up level, but others as well.
Very cool. Dave, curious that I was joking with you earlier. I flipped on the TV this morning and put on CNBC at 8:30, and there you were getting interviewed by talking about the company. And so that crystallized for me the question for you is like, as the role, as you've moved on, the company's gotten bigger, how much time do you have to spend, break it down for us. How much time are you spending on internal things versus external? And what is, the external components are not just customer, right? It's a lot of investor stuff. And how does that work? Just break it down for us.
It varies greatly by time in the quarter. So we run, again, think about a 12-week quarter. I could tell you, depending on the week, what my priority is. It's that regimented, right? There are certain rhythms that you can't avoid. I think I would actually, if I were to distill it back, right, like bring it back, I think the CEO job is particularly difficult because you're trying to solve 2 things. Number one is how do I get the systems of the machine working smoothly, the lead to cash system, the cash to renewal system, the new product introduction system, the planning and resource allocation system. You're building the fundamental systems in your company and they have to be working. Like that is how you get the vessel going quickly. But then you have to, at the same time, because you have a 36-month time horizon of the company, you have to be positioning the company against a moving dynamic environment to make sure that machine keeps on rolling. I think that is the hard part of the job, is you have these 2 jobs. So that's actually how I think about spending my time. I think, I spend a good amount of time reviewing the systems of the company. Hey, I want to review the lead to cash system. That's week 3. Right? That's what we do. That's week 5. It's week 9. We do it week 10, week 13. Like there's a rhythm to it. Right? But then at the same time, I want to be out there talking to customers, to partners, to press, to investors, to inform my point of view around how we need to keep evolving. Maybe our packaging and pricing isn't right. Maybe our insertion point into how we get into accounts isn't right. And I'm constantly trying to get that from the market. So it kind of splits in those 2 buckets, which is also what keeps it interesting. Obviously, we're at a different scale now. When earlier on, I was heavily involved in the lead to cash system, where I probably touched 80% of the deals that came across our desk, but we're kind of beyond that now. It's more of a system architecture challenge than my direct energy.
Got it.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It also sounds like context switching is pretty dramatic in the business.
It's unbelievable. I think that's honestly the hardest part of the job. It's just like the cognitive load is super high because of the context switching. These jobs are hard. I mean, I think as you and I joked about, like I had no interest in being a CEO. This is a really difficult job. But at the same time,
I remember
Yeah,
it took me 6 months to convince you.
But at the same time, I'm genuinely intrigued by the domain. I think it's fascinating, and I think that that intellectual nourishment is what makes you tolerate it, because it's super interesting to be in that market data flow. But you have to attend to the systems too.
Okay, we got a question about working with your board as a CEO, and I'll put on earmuffs, but. Barr, like any thoughts about, how you've tried to get value out of the board, and, and make sure it's productive versus getting dysfunctional and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think we're very fortunate to have an amazing board. And so I actually think very highly of our board. And I genuinely enjoy spending time with them. Glenn, you shouldn't be listening. But I think that's the truth. Like
I was on 2 recruiting calls for potential engineering hires this morning for you. So.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you're lucky, then like your board members actually like help you target, find, sell, close candidates. So that's if you're lucky. I consider myself lucky in that aspect. And customers, by the way, like Glenn has spoken with many of our customers as well. And I mean, I think also like, folks, Glenn, you and others on our board have like seen a lot of the movie before, and actually have like a really unique perspective, which I don't have. And so I really, really value that. And so generally I, love having sort of the board be in the loop on kind of, major things that are happening, meet often enough that you have context to be helpful, but not too often that it actually takes away from execution, right? Obviously, like never have anything be a surprise. And more than anything, I think of just like a strong sort of sounding board and thought partner in the day-to-day. So I think in general, like, our board meetings are quarterly or every 2 to 3 months. And they're typically a combination of like getting to know our team, like actually our executive team, getting sort of the latest on the company and actually sharing input on a couple of topics that we're actually really struggling with, or a couple of topics that we want that input. I think my pet peeve when it comes to this is like oftentimes, the board prep can take months actually at a company. And for us, I think it's very important to prep for these, so they're very useful. But to that extent that it's actually useful to the company. Like it's useful to sit down and reflect on what has happened, what we're doing, what's going well, what's not going well, and what we want to do better. But also, remember that it is time away from execution. So we don't want to spend up most of the quarter actually planning for the board. To sometimes happen. And I think in general, like I actually, I love my board. So I'm very happy working with these people. I think I'm actually very fortunate to be having them on this journey, and I'm super grateful for your help and all of your help. And now pretend like you didn't hear that, Glenn, so we can.
Well, I'll give you props. One of the things that you guys have started doing in the last couple of meetings, which I think is great, is you have a slide deck, but you also prepare a memo, like a read ahead memo, which is it's a great way to communicate what's on your mind and what's going right, what you're working on. And it brings everybody to the meeting with a very consistent level of understanding. So I feel like we can jump into pretty substantive topics pretty quickly because of the work you guys do. So, and I don't see a lot of companies doing it, but those that do it, I think it's just great. Open Door is another board I'm on where they're really good with the memo writing, and I just find it to be an amazing best practice. So Dave, we're at the top of the hour. Last one for you. You've had to transition. You're in the process of, as you've gotten bigger, you're moving from like largely a VC board to bringing on operators and other independents onto your board. Just curious if you'd say a word or two about what that's been like, and any suggestions as people are thinking about independence for their board.
Yeah, I just think that the operator lens is so valuable on a board, not only because they have empathy, just natural empathy for the job you're doing, but also because they're generally in the market with you. And so they're probably thinking about some of the same things that you are. So we added a head of an audit committee who's an independent board member, and then Susan St. Ledger, who is president of Okta. And that it ends up being like a very clear peer sounding board for us. And I highly recommend to the addition of operators to your board, just because they're in it day to day in a way that it's hard for others to be in, who add value in a different way. I would just echo the point on the value of it. I think, ultimately we run the companies. The management team runs the company. The CEO has to represent it. But the act of having to present to a board quarterly is hugely valuable in enforcing a distillation of issues for you to chew through. And I think that's a huge percentage of the value, is the ability to say, like, hey, like my structure for every meeting, for every board meeting is, hey, here's what's going well, here's what's going poorly, here's what I'm thinking about. And it's here's what I'm thinking about that are the things we end up discussing every board meeting. And I think that's where the value comes from, is sort of using that group as a way to say, like, hey, this is what we're thinking about, open suggestions. We got it, we're in control. But appreciate your guidance on it. I think that's the right balance. And if you have operators, it's actually a lot easier for them to react. So I'm a huge fan. I just joined the board for that same reason. I just thought it'd be interesting to provide that sounding board, and it's proven to be super worthwhile.
Fantastic. Well, Barr, Dave, this has been a great conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in this hour, and I want to say thank you to both of you. You've shared a lot of wisdom, and it's very clear to me, and I'm sure everybody else listening, why your companies have been so successful. You guys are incredible leaders, and are so far ahead of the various twists and turns in your businesses, which is really encouraging and amazing to see. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom, and we'll see everybody again in a week for the next installment of Evolving Enterprise.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye now.